As God's chosen one, perhaps from a very early age, you've carried a feeling that's hard to put into words, not a feeling of being superior to others, nor a feeling of being special in a way that draws attention. Rather, a very strange feeling. You don't function like the majority, even though you've tried so hard to blend in. When those around you choose the safe option, you feel a heavy weight in your heart. When things could easily pass in silence, you can't pretend not to see. And there are moments when someone tells you, "That's fine as it is." Something inside you whispers, very softly, but very clearly, "No." You didn't grow up dreaming of being different. On the contrary, perhaps you wished you were more normal, easier to live with, less sensitive, less thoughtful. But the more you mature, the more you realize there are things within you that refuse to compromise. You can remain silent, but you cannot lie. You can suffer, but you cannot betray yourself. And that somehow makes your life always accompanied by pressure. Pressure doesn't come in a noisy way. It appears at precisely the right time, at the right moment. Often, it's when everyone thinks it wouldn't hurt to do things differently. Often, it's when an easy choice opens up right before your eyes, safe enough, reasonable enough, enough that no one will blame you. But at that very moment, you feel cornered. No one forces you. No one threatens you. Only a familiar feeling returns. If I choose this path, I will lose a very important part of myself. Some people call it stubbornness. Some say you're too principled. Some think you're making yourself miserable. But they don't live in your head. They don't hear the repeated questions in the silence. They don't feel the very special unease that arises whenever you face a seemingly harmless decision. Because for you, the issue is never about right or wrong according to external standards. The issue is, can you still respect yourself after this choice? Your courage isn't spontaneous. It's not like those superficial moments of heroism. It often appears when no one applauds, when no one is on your side, when the reward is unclear, but the price is very real. That's when you choose to say what needs to be said, even knowing you'll be misunderstood. That's when you choose to withdraw from places others call opportunities. That's when you choose not to move forward, even though the path is already cleared. And after each such instance, you don't feel like you've won. You just feel you're still intact. Strangely, you're not someone who seeks challenges. You don't intentionally take the difficult path, but life seems to always put you in situations where the easy choices aren't for you. Crossroads where, if you followed the crowd, you'd be fine. But if you follow your inner voice, you'll face many things: loss, loneliness, waiting, and long periods where no one understands what you're doing. And it's in those moments that you begin to ask yourself, not once, why am I always the one who has to bear the heavy burden? There are survival reflexes that humans learn to protect themselves: avoiding conflict, staying silent for safety, bowing your head to avoid attention. You understand all of that. You've even tried applying them. But strangely, they don't work for you long term. You might find temporary peace, but deep down you're in turmoil. It's as if your body accepts it, but your soul doesn't. And then, at some point, you're forced to return to yourself, to the truth you've been trying to ignore. Perhaps that's why you often feel out of sync with the world. Not because you don't belong here, but because you can't live by rules based solely on fear. What makes others hesitate isn't enough to hold you back. Promises of safety aren't enough to make you close your eyes. And threats, however subtle, can't reach the deepest part of you, not because you don't know fear, but because something within you values truth more than safety. If you look back, you'll see a clear common denominator. Every time you try to live a smaller life, your life becomes heavier. Every time you try to please everyone, you lose your peace. But every time you dare to stand tall, dare to choose a path no one encourages, then, however difficult, you feel alive, not happy, but true. And that feeling, once it appears, doesn't easily disappear. Perhaps you've never thought of yourself as someone special. Maybe you just think of yourself as someone who's hard to live with. But if right now these words are touching you, if you feel like someone is describing exactly what you've lived through, then perhaps it's time to stop wondering if there's something wrong with you. Perhaps, instead of trying to fit in with the world, you need to stop and ask yourself, if I wasn't born to live like the majority, then what was I called to do? And if you want to continue with content for those who don't choose the easy path, if you want to hear straightforward words about your experiences, without embellishment or persuasion, then subscribe and stay. Not because you need more content to watch, but because there are conversations meant only for those ready to look directly at their own differences. As a chosen one of God, there's something very few people realize, but you've felt it for a long time. That's the moment you stop reacting in your usual way. No more rushing to find the safe path. No more trying to please everyone. No more pretending not to see what's bothering you. You just stand still, long enough to listen to something deeper within yourself. And that very moment, though silent, creates a wave you can't see with your eyes. When you break the rules, you don't need to do anything big. You don't oppose anyone. You don't declare anything. You simply become less easily manipulated. And that's enough to start things changing. Relationships that used to run smoothly become unpredictable. Words that were once confident now carry a hint of caution. Not because you're wrong, but because you're no longer playing by the old rules. You can sense that recognition in silence. No one names it, but you see it through the evasive glances, through the way others begin to test you with seemingly harmless remarks. The once wide paths slow down, as if waiting to see how you react. You are no longer seen as an easy fit-in, not because you are dangerous, but because you are no longer easily controlled by things that once worked so well for the majority. There are fears that have clung to you for years. Fear of being left behind, fear of being misunderstood, fear of becoming a difficult person to live with, fear of losing the stability you worked so hard to achieve. But then, at some point, those fears no longer have the power to hold you in place. You still feel them very clearly, but you no longer let them decide for you. And that's when an invisible boundary is broken. When fear no longer controls you, familiar mechanisms begin to malfunction. Promises of security no longer reassure you. Sayings like, "everyone does it," no longer convince you. Threats wrapped in logic no longer make you back down. You begin to realize that what's exhausting isn't the difficulty, but the constant pretense of being okay with things that contradict your inner truth. And then the confrontation begins. Not noisy, not direct. No one stands up to confront you. Everything happens very ordinarily, very logically, but you know very well that you are being watched. Challenges appear precisely when you have chosen to stand a little taller. Obstacles come right after you refuse an easy path. Misunderstandings occur when you think everything is clear enough. It's not to destroy you, but to see how long you can hold on. God's chosen ones don't test your outward strength. They test your inner resilience. They test whether you will return to your old ways when you feel tired. They test whether you will accept living a smaller life just for peace of mind. And it is here that your deepest desire is revealed. You don't need to win against anyone. You just want to live authentically without losing yourself, little by little. You are not seeking conflict. You also don't want to be someone who has to constantly prove something. What you crave is simply the peace that comes from not betraying yourself. But it seems that every time you get closer to that peace, you are placed in situations that force you to make choices. No one forces you. No one threatens you. Only one question repeats itself in silence. Will you choose the easy way, or will you choose the right way? If you look closely, you will see something very consistent. Each time you step back, you are a little more at peace, but much more empty. Each time you stand tall, you are more tired, but your heart becomes clearer. And it is that clarity that makes you less vulnerable. Not because no one can reach you, but because you no longer allow things based on fear to define you. God's chosen one, If you're listening to these words and feel like they resonate with what you've experienced, the quiet trials, the nameless pressures, the periods of being put in difficult positions simply because you refuse to live wrongly, then you don't need to ask yourself if there's something wrong. You are being recognized, you are being validated. And if you understand this, if you feel you're not alone in that experience, leave us 777 inches the comments, not to explain, not to prove, but as a silent sign that you know where you stand, God's chosen one. There's a very clear moment you may have experienced, though you've never named it. It's when you realize that the things that used to hold you back no longer work, not because they disappear, not because you become reckless, but because something inside you has shifted positions. Fear is still there, but it's no longer in the driver's seat. For a long time, the world operated smoothly through invisible systems. No shackles needed, no coercion, just enough fear, enough deprivation, enough pressure, and people would adjust themselves to fit the mold. You once lived within those molds. You learned to be silent to find peace. You learned to accept things so you wouldn't be excluded. You learned to shrink yourself so you wouldn't become a problem. And, to some extent, it worked. But then, at some point, that system started malfunctioning for you. The old formulas no longer yielded the expected results. The warnings no longer carried enough weight. The prospect of loss no longer made you turn back. Not because you didn't see the risks, but because you saw a different, much greater price. The price of continuing to live against your inner truth. As the old systems of control gradually lose their effectiveness, you begin to sense a subtle shift in how the world reacts to you. Words that once carried weight now seem irrelevant. Unwritten rules that once kept others obedient no longer hold you in place. You don't break the rules. You don't resist. You simply no longer let fear underpin your choices. And that reveals a truth. The system was never as strong as it appeared. It was only strong when people believed in it. Your courage, therefore, becomes a new threat. Not the boisterous kind, not the courage of direct confrontation, but the courage of not reacting according to a familiar script. You don't panic when threatened. You don't rush when pressured. You don't trade truth for temporary peace. And it is this calmness that causes the structures built on fear to begin to show their weaknesses. God's chosen one. You don't need to attack anyone to break the system. You just need to stop submitting to it out of fear. When you stand firm in your choice, when you accept the price without bitterness, when you refuse paths that lead you to lose yourself, you are doing something very few dare to do. You are drawing out the energy that fuels control. What once held others captive, public pressure, fear of abandonment, anxiety about insecurity, the need for acceptance no longer holds you, not because you are immune, but because you have looked them straight in the eye long enough to understand that they have no right to define you. You see clearly that fear is only strong when you run away from it. When you stand still, it loses its shape, and from that moment, you become an unsettling variable to any system based on fear. No one can easily predict what you will do next, because you no longer react in a pattern. You are not bought off by security. You are not intimidated by threats. You don't need to win, but you also don't accept defeat by betraying yourself. The point is, this courage doesn't make you aggressive. On the contrary, it makes you more composed, more solid, more clear. You don't need to prove anything. You don't need to make a big deal out of it. Your very presence creates pressure because it exposes a possibility many people are unwilling to confront, that human beings can live without being controlled by fear, God's chosen one. If you feel that the more authentically you live, the less you are shaken by what once made you tremble. If you realize that the old rules of the game no longer bind you as they once did. If you find that you don't need to fight but still cause flawed structures to gradually lose their effectiveness, then it's not a coincidence. It's a sign of someone who has moved to another level of inner freedom. And that freedom doesn't come from violence. It doesn't come from overthrowing anyone. It comes from a very quiet but very firm choice to no longer live in fear. When you do that, you not only liberate yourself, but you also inadvertently open a door for others, those who are watching in silence, those who haven't dared to step out yet, but have begun to believe that there is another path. God's chosen one. Perhaps you've wondered why you don't panic in the face of challenges that others call overwhelming. It's not because you're not tired. It's not because you don't feel pressure. It's because in those moments, a strange feeling emerges, a feeling so familiar it's almost calming, as if you've been here before, as if this path, however bumpy, isn't entirely unfamiliar to you. You're not someone who seeks danger. You don't like confrontation. You don't try to prove you're stronger than anyone else. But somehow, challenges always find you. Not loudly, not ostentatiously, just precisely enough to put you in situations where you can't turn back. And what sets you apart isn't that you're not afraid, but that you know you have to keep going, even when the destination isn't yet clear. There are times when you face difficulties and don't understand why you remain so calm. It's not the calm of resignation, but a very deep, very focused concentration. It's as if a part of you is accustomed to this, accustomed to standing firm when everything around you is turbulent, accustomed to making decisions without sufficient information, accustomed to taking responsibility for your choices without needing anyone to guarantee the outcome. This feeling of having been doesn't come from this life's memories. It's not tied to any specific event you can recount. It appears as a very thin, very deep wave whenever you're pushed to the edge, as if something inside you remembers how to stand, how to breathe, how to remain intact in a storm. And you do it naturally, without learning. The chosen one of God, the warrior nature within you, doesn't embody violence or conquest. It embodies perseverance, the ability to endure without bitterness, the steadfastness of upholding values even when no one is watching. You don't need applause. You don't need titles. You just need to know that you haven't betrayed what's deeply ingrained within you. Perhaps that's why you don't easily forget what you've been through. Not because you cling to the past, but because you feel that each challenge is awakening a very ancient part of you, a part that has overcome even harsher things, a part that understands that pain isn't a sign of failure, but a sign of movement. And each time you get up, without resentment, without self-pity, that part becomes clearer. You have the ability to break through the veil of familiarity in a very unique way, not by recalling images or stories, but by recognizing who you are in the decisive moment. When you don't let fear lead you, when you don't let exhaustion make you betray yourself, when you choose correctly, even if the price is loneliness. It is those choices that pull you out of oblivion, little by little. The chosen one of God, the warrior soul, needs no loud pronouncements. It awakens in silence. It reveals itself when you are cornered and have no choice but to be true to yourself. It becomes clear when you feel you don't belong to the old patterns, the old paths, the ways of life based on fear and compromise. And you don't need to understand it all right now. You just need to realize that this familiar feeling isn't an illusion. There are people who will never understand why you endure what they can't. They'll think you're cold, or too tough, or too unapproachable. But they don't hear the very different beat inside you. The beat of a soul that has stood in the midst of trials and knows it won't break. Not because you're immortal, but because you know how to get through it. And when you look back, you'll see one thing very clearly. The hardest times don't diminish you. They make you clearer. Clearly, what you cannot trade away. Clearly, the limits you will not allow anyone to cross. Clearly, the person you become when you have nothing left to cling to but yourself. It is not a coincidence. It is the reactivation of a nature that has been dormant long enough. God's chosen one. If you feel that each time you face a challenge, a very deep part of you does not panic, but quietly rises up. If you realize that you do not seek battle, but are always ready when it comes, if you feel a silent but unbreakable strength, then you don't need to look far for the answer. The soul's memory doesn't need to be retold. It just needs to live on, just as you have always done. God's chosen one, there is a very subtle moment that not everyone recognizes when it happens. No loud noise, no ostentatious signs, just a very slight shift in your feeling. You are no longer straining as before. It's not that the challenges disappear, but that the feeling of having to fend for myself suddenly subsides. It's as if an invisible hand is placed in the right place at the right time, letting you know that you're no longer standing alone against the headwinds. That moment doesn't come when you're strongest, nor when you're most ready. It comes when you've come far enough in honesty with yourself. When you've proven, not with words but with repeated choices, that you won't return to your old ways out of fear. When you've accepted the price of standing tall without resentment, and at that very moment, something very important is silently confirmed. Your warrior decree has been recorded. You don't hear it, you don't see it, but you feel the difference in how things begin to rearrange themselves. Situations that once exhausted you no longer overwhelm you. Challenges still come, but they no longer carry the feeling of being abandoned. You begin to realize that even if you don't have all the answers yet, you're still qualified to move forward. Not because you're better, but because there's support at play right now. Invisible protection doesn't appear by preventing every collision. It appears by preventing collisions from destroying you. You still go through difficult times. You still face tough choices. But a new limit is set. Things that once pushed you to the brink are now just enough to challenge you, no longer enough to crush you. It's as if a boundary has been drawn precisely, so you still learn, but are no longer crushed. As a chosen one of God, you can recognize this protection in very ordinary details. A timely encounter, information that appears when you're almost giving up, a small opportunity that opens when all the big doors are closed. Nothing too spectacular, but in retrospect, you see that everything came to you just enough. Enough so you don't turn back. Enough so you don't have to compromise what's essential. Enough so you understand that you're being led, not pushed. Resources appear not when you want them most, but when you need them most. When you are forced to cross a new threshold in your life. When you have to make a decision that, without timely support, you wouldn't be able to hold on to, and that support doesn't make you dependent. It does only one thing: remind you that you are not alone on this journey. There are challenges that once felt very lonely. You've become accustomed to bearing them yourself, accustomed to not expecting anything in return, accustomed to picking yourself up after every fall. But then, at a certain point, the challenges that felt alone begin to close. Not because you no longer face difficulties, but because you no longer endure them in absolute silence. There is a very quiet, very discreet, but very firm companionship. As a chosen one of God, this intervention doesn't weaken you. On the contrary, it allows you to be stronger in a more enduring way. You don't need to strain yourself to prove anything. You don't need to go faster than you're capable of. You're allowed to go at your own pace, because that pace has already been factored in, and it's this very subtle sense of security that helps you maintain clarity in your subsequent choices. You begin to realize that you no longer have to fight for recognition. Recognition has already come in silence, not from people, but from a deeper order that you don't need to name. You're no longer tested to see if you'll give up. You're tested to see how you'll lead once you're standing firm. And that's a very different, very subtle stage, very easy to overlook if you're not alert enough. If you pay attention, you'll find you're no longer caught up in meaningless battles. You're no longer dragged into conflicts that only drain your energy. Things that don't belong to you gradually fall away. Connections that are no longer in harmony automatically separate. There's no noisy severance, just a very natural rearrangement to make room for the next part of your journey. For God's chosen ones, divine intervention doesn't come to live your life for you. It comes to ensure that, when you live true to what is meant to be within you, you won't be left behind. You still have to walk. You still have to make choices. But you no longer walk in absolute darkness. There's enough light to see the next step, and that's enough. For God's chosen ones, there's a very common misunderstanding about victory. Many people think that victory is when everything becomes easier, when challenges disappear, when the road ahead is less bumpy. But you know very well that your true victory doesn't take that form. Your life didn't suddenly become lighter. Your work didn't suddenly become smoother. People didn't suddenly become kinder. But one thing has changed, profoundly. You are stronger. You are no longer knocked down by the things that once shook you. Not because you no longer have feelings, but because you no longer let feelings pull you away from yourself. Situations that once made you doubt your self-worth now only make you pause and observe. Words that once hurt you now just pass by, no longer taking root. You still feel, but you are no longer falling apart. And that is a very clear sign of a battle that has ended within. The spiritual victory doesn't come with cheers. It comes with a very firm silence, a certainty that needs no one's approval. You no longer have to constantly ask yourself if you're wrong every time you choose the difficult path. You no longer have to explain so much. It's not because you despise others, but because you no longer need consensus to stand firm. You know where you stand, and that feeling can't be easily shaken as before. God's chosen one, your courage has transformed. Before, it was something you had to strain to use. It tired you, it made you lonely, it cost you. But now, courage is no longer an effort. It has become your natural state. You don't need to try to be strong, you just need to be present in the way you've chosen, and that's enough to make an impact. You begin to realize that you no longer need to talk much to be heard. Not everyone agrees with you, but they begin to pay attention. Not everyone understands you, but they sense the steadfastness emanating from you. That quiet courage spreads around, not as a call to action, but as a new standard. Others look at you and realize that there is a different way of life, one not based on fear, not based on constant compromise. The energy around you begins to shift in very subtle ways. Meaningless conversations become less frequent. Unnecessary conflicts no longer seek you out as often. Not because you avoid them, but because you no longer resonate with them. Relationships that once existed only through tolerance begin to naturally fall apart. There's no noisy breakup, just a disconnect. As a chosen one of God, you can recognize this shift in your own body. You are less stressed when faced with uncertainty. You panic less when plans change. You no longer feel threatened whenever someone disagrees with you. Not because you become numb, but because you have won a crucial battle. The battle of not letting fear control your reactions. This stability doesn't distance you from the world. On the contrary, it makes you more fully present. You listen better because you're no longer defensive. You speak more clearly because you no longer need to hide. You act more decisively because you are no longer dragged back by recurring doubts. And that clarity creates an influence you don't actively seek. There are people who can't explain why they feel different when they're around you. They just know that, in your presence, things are less chaotic. Not because you give them answers, but because your presence doesn't bring fear. And in a world accustomed to operating on anxiety, unwavering serenity becomes a very powerful force. As God's chosen one, winning the spiritual battle doesn't put you above anyone, it puts you in your place. You don't need to drag others along. You don't need to convince anyone to change. Your role is clear now. Live right, live authentically, live consistently. The rest will fall into place. Those who are ready will recognize you. Those who aren't ready will leave. And both are fine. You can look back and see that you've overcome so much you never thought you could handle. Not to boast, but to confirm a truth. You've changed, not because you're more special, but because you're no longer being dragged along by forces you don't understand. You know where you stand, and from that position, you no longer need to fight to prove your worth. For a chosen one of God, this is the sign of a silent but complete victory. Your life still has its storms, but you've learned to stand firm in them. Courage is no longer a burden. It becomes the foundation, and on that foundation, every step you take will have a very different quality, not noisy, not hurried, but unstoppable. For a chosen one of God, when an inner battle has ended, another phase quietly opens. There are no trumpets to signal it, no clear boundaries to let you know you've stepped into a new role. It's simply the feeling that you're no longer allowed to live the way you used to, not because someone asks you to, but because you yourself can't go back to being your old self. You begin to realize that the steadfastness you carry isn't just for yourself, not in a way you have to bear burdens or save others, but in a very natural way. Your presence calms the waves of fear around you. When you enter a tense space, you don't need to say much, you don't need to prove anything. Simply not being swept away by fear is enough to create a point of support that others unconsciously sense. You become a strange kind of antidote to collective fear, not through advice, nor through empty comfort, but through the way you live, the way you choose, the way you don't react according to old patterns. In a world accustomed to panic, your serenity becomes a rarity, and that rarity has a more powerful impact than any speech. As God's chosen one, you are not called to stand on a platform telling others what to do. You are not called upon to shoulder responsibility for anyone else. Your role is far more subtle. You are called upon to be living proof that humans can navigate chaos without losing themselves, that it is possible to face the truth without becoming bitter, that it is possible to choose right without waging war. Your inspiration doesn't come from words, it comes from small but consistent actions, from your refusal to engage in conversations that fuel fear, from your refusal to amplify the chaos even when you could, from your unwavering commitment to values even when no one is watching. Others look at you and don't know what to call it, but they sense that a different way of living exists right before their eyes, and in silence, a connection begins to form. You don't seek it, you don't actively build it, but you realize there are familiar glances, unexplained empathy, moments when you and a stranger understand each other through a shared choice. Other warrior souls, though never met, begin to recognize each other through the way they stand firm amidst the same kind of challenge. This connection needs no organization, it needs no name, it doesn't need to be public, it operates subtly, very quietly, but very enduringly. Each person is in their place, doing their part, and in that way, a network of awareness gradually forms. No one commands, no one orders, but there is a clear resonance in how you choose to react to the world. God's chosen ones, when enough people no longer react with fear, the common understanding begins to shift, not through noisy revolutions, but through changes in seemingly small things. How people listen to each other, how they make decisions, how they are no longer easily manipulated by collective panic. And you, unintentionally, are contributing to that shift. You don't need to do more than you can. You don't need to go faster than your pace. Your current task is not to expand, but to maintain. Maintain the clarity you have achieved. Maintain the courage that has become your foundation. Maintain your unmasked presence. It is this persistence that creates a more lasting impact than any strenuous effort. There may come a time when you wonder if you are doing enough, whether your silence truly makes a difference. But look back. Each time you refuse to give in to fear, an old cycle is broken. Each time you choose truth over false security, a new standard is set. And each time you stand firm without needing proof, you are showing others that they too can do it. As God's chosen one, your mission doesn't demand further sacrifice. It simply calls you to continue living true to who you have become, not shrinking, not showing off, not turning your back on the clarity given to you. When you do that, the rest will fall into place. Those who need to see will see. Those who are not ready will leave. And you don't need to hold on to or push anyone away. You are in a very special position, no longer someone searching for a path, but not yet someone needing verbal guidance. You are the anchor, the proof, the presence that reminds us that humanity can overcome fear without losing its humanity. And from this point, your journey continues not burdensome, not stressful, but with a much deeper meaning than before. There are signs that don't need to be announced. They don't appear on the surface, nor do they need anyone's confirmation. They emerge very quietly, very deeply, and are often only recognized when you've gone through enough challenges to no longer doubt yourself as before. If you listen carefully, you'll find these signs don't come all at once, but they always appear in the right order, at your own rhythm. You may begin to realize this firsthand in the most difficult moments, when every choice has its own price, when there is no option that is both safe, comfortable, and universally supported, and it is at that moment, instead of panicking or chasing temporary solutions, that you make the right decision. Not right according to the majority's standards, but right according to what you know will not betray you. Even though your heart is heavy, even though that path doesn't promise immediate rewards, you still choose it. And when it's over, you realize you have no regrets, just tired but not empty. God's chosen ones have shortcuts that were once very tempting, paths that could help you go faster, lighter, with less pain. But strangely, each time you stand before those shortcuts, there is a clear hesitation within you, not because you don't see the benefit, but because you see the hidden price behind them. You understand that if you take that path, you'll get there faster, but you won't be yourself when you arrive. And so, you refuse, not because you enjoy hardship, but because you won't trade truth for convenience. Gradually, your intuition sharpens in a very different way, not noisy, not mysterious. You simply begin to know before things happen. You sense when an invitation sounds reasonable but isn't for you. You recognize when a seemingly good relationship is actually draining. You know when to move forward, when to stop, even though you can't always explain why. And, significantly, this intuition becomes clearer the more honest you are with yourself. For God's chosen one, along with intuition, a very deep form of memory begins to surface. Not a memory of specific images or stories, but a familiar feeling whenever you face an important situation. It's as if you've been here before, as if you've made this choice before, and as if you know very clearly that even though the road ahead isn't easy, you won't get lost. That feeling doesn't come from life experience, but from a deeper level where you no longer need to relearn what you already know. There are times when you're so tired you just want to stop. There are periods when you wonder if you're making things harder than necessary. But even in those moments, there's a feeling that never completely disappears. The feeling that you're on the right path. Not an easy path, not a fast one, but the right path for you. And that feeling, though subtle, so quiet, is always enough to take another step. As God's chosen one, you may not talk much about your journey. You may not share everything you've experienced, but you realize that you're no longer swayed by opposing opinions as you once were. It's not because you're stubborn, but because you've learned to distinguish between noise and truth. You no longer need someone constantly confirming that you're doing the right thing. The confirmation is already happening within you, silently but firmly. These signs don't make you perfect. You still have doubts. You still get tired. You still have days when you want to give up. But the difference is, you no longer turn your back on yourself on those days. You allow yourself to be tired, but you don't allow yourself to betray what you know is right. And it is that consistency over time that creates an identity that no force can easily break. God's chosen one. If you are listening to these words and see each sign as being read from your own experience, if you nod silently for more than a moment, if you feel no need to prove anything to anyone, just quietly confirm it to yourself, then you don't need to look for any more signs. What you are living is the answer. You don't need to rush. You don't need to go faster than your own pace. Just continue walking as you have been walking. Alert, honest, courageous, in a quiet way. The signs will continue to appear, not to convince you, but to remind you that you haven't taken the wrong path. And from this point of confirmation, every subsequent step, will have a very different firmness, not noisy, but unmistakable. God's chosen one, here you need no further explanation. No one needs to confirm it for you. No bigger, clearer, or more convincing sign is needed, because the most important thing has already happened. You have realized where you stand, and that realization is not noisy, not dazzling, but firm enough to prevent you from being swept away as before. You don't need to prove anything to the world. The years that have passed, the choices you've made in silence, the times you chose to stand tall when no one was looking, they all speak for themselves. Not everyone understands, not everyone acknowledges, but you no longer need that. The peace you're feeling doesn't come from external approval, but from no longer being in conflict with yourself. God's chosen ones possess a very special kind of strength that only emerges when people stop trying to be something else, when you stop straining to appear strong, when you stop shrinking yourself to be accepted, when you allow yourself to stand where you are with all simplicity and honesty. At that moment, your energy becomes stable, no surges, no fluctuations, and therefore not easily disturbed. You don't need to be loud to be seen. You don't need to speak loudly to be heard. Your presence, once stable, creates its own impact. Others may not know what's happening when they're near you, but they feel the difference, not because you're better, but because you don't carry fear. And in a world accustomed to operating on fear, its absence was a very clear invitation. God's chosen one, you've moved past the stage of straining to prove yourself right. Now, you just need to continue walking as you've always walked, slowly, mindfully, and consistently. No need to speed up, no need to turn around, no need to look to the side for comparison. Your path isn't measured by speed, but by authenticity. And you chose authenticity a long time ago. There may still be tiring days, moments of fleeting confusion, moments when you wonder if you're doing things harder than necessary. But notice, even in those times, you no longer lose your way. You may stop to breathe, but you no longer run away. You may rest, but you don't turn your back on what you know is right. That is mature courage, not noisy, but unstoppable. God's chosen one, locking your energy isn't about doing something new. It's about stopping doing things that are no longer right for you. Stop reacting out of fear. Stop explaining to those who don't want to understand. Stop trading peace for fleeting validation. Each time you do that, your energy automatically shuts down, becoming neat, clear, and powerful in a very lasting way. You don't need to drag anyone along. Those who need to see will see. Those who need time will have their time. Your role isn't to lead with words, but to hold firm with presence. When you live right, you allow others to believe they too can live right. When you don't amplify fear, you create space for the truth to be heard. And that's how the deepest influence spreads, without coercion, without argument, without imposition. God's chosen one, let this journey end completely. No dramatic ending needed, no grand promises needed. Just keep moving forward, carrying the courage forged over time. Each step you take, free from fear, is a silent affirmation that humans can live authentically, truly, and steadfastly in this ever-changing world. And if you ever need to remind yourself of this, return to the simple yet firm feeling you possess right now, the feeling that you don't need to be someone else, you don't need to chase a role model, you don't need to explain why you chose this path. You just need to continue being present as you are. The rest, the world, people, circumstances will adjust accordingly. God's chosen one, your very presence, is a calling. Not a loud, boisterous calling, but a profound one for those quiet enough to feel, courageous enough not to turn their backs on themselves. And from here, your journey continues, not needing to be witnessed, not needing to be praised, but always being supported in a very quiet, very real way.